We have an outside speaker. Stephane's come all the way from UBC. We know Stephane well. He was a PEDS fellow here in 2003. And that was in the days when the PEDS fellow came back and forth between level 1 and level 3, so we all got to know him. Prior to that, he's from Cape Town in South Africa. He was a cardiac fellow in Leicester. He did well to escape there. Many of my family live there, and the only good thing you can say about Leicester is that it's better than Barnsley. He came to Everton.
They won the cup last year.
They won the cup last year.
Yeah. He claims to be a fan, but I'm not sure. He came to Edmonton, made a great impression. He meekly stood there while we mispronounced his name for most of the year. Everyone called him Dr. Malherbe, and he was very polite, and he just sort of took it, like a man. But he's now gone to much better things. He's an associate professor at the UBC in pediatrics, where his interests are manifold, but including waste gas in the air. We're grateful to Dan from AbbVie for bringing him here, but I'm assured that the content is his own. So without further ado, let me get this right. Please welcome Dr. Stephane Malherbe.
Thanks, Sophie, and thanks for the invitation, and thanks, Dan, for sponsoring me. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. This is a very unusual topic, and I realize that it's a bit of a dry one, operating on waste, global warming, and sustainable anesthesia, but it's something that I feel very strongly about. As Sophie said, I trained in Cape Town. So this is the University of Cape Town, the top picture there. And the bottom one's the University of Stellenbosch. And Ed actually trained in Cape Town too. And rumor has it when Ed left, things actually improved quite drastically.
Yeah, true.
It's true. But one thing I didn't realize at the time, and in retrospect, like our operating room budget was very, very small, significantly smaller than what it is here. And when I came to Canada first time, Medicine Hat in 2000, I was shocked at how much garbage and waste we were producing. And it's been bothering me. I've been here for 16 years and I still haven't quite come to terms with it. So my objectives are fairly simple. We produce all this waste. I want to quantify the magnitude of that and then look at a few strategies that we can specifically reduce anesthesia waste. And then try to understand the global warming effect of the volatile anesthetic agents, and then a couple of strategies that we can try to minimize our greenhouse gas effect of the volatile agents. And I've given this talk on multiple occasions, and I say the same thing every time. If I achieve absolutely nothing today, it's simply to raise awareness that this is a problem, and it's getting worse all the time. And hopefully by raising awareness, we can slowly start to change our culture and our wasteful ways. So just a disclosure, I have taken part in a consultative meeting with AbbVie for which I was compensated, and I've also presented at the AbbVie AGM, and I was compensated for that. And then AbbVie is sponsoring the trip to Edmonton and Red Deer tomorrow. But I have no affiliation to AbbVie. I have no shares. In fact, if you live in Vancouver, the only thing you do own is a relatively big mortgage. So I do own that, but no other affiliation to any other company. This is an article I read in the New York Times a couple of years ago by a guy called Jared Diamond, who wrote the book Guns, Germs, and Steel that many of you may have read. He talks about the consumption factor. He defines the consumption factor as the rate at which we use resources such as metals and oil, and the rate at which we produce waste such as greenhouse gases and plastics. And he says that the average person in the developed world, in other words us, has a consumption factor of 32 times that of somebody in the developing world. So we use far more resources, we produce far more waste than anybody in the developing world. And I honestly believe that nowhere is that discrepancy in consumption factor bigger than the healthcare system that we work in. So this is just my room at the end of the day. We've opened all these disposable instruments and drapes and covers. And the end of the day, the cleaner, that's Firmina, one of our cleaners, she comes in, they clean it all up, it goes straight to the garbage, and we get to do this over and over in every single room and every single operating room complex every day. There's two things that really shaped my interest in this topic. The first was this article in May 2012, or a series of articles in the May 2012 issue of ANA, where they said that US hospitals produce 3,000 tons of garbage every single day. And a third of that, 1,000 tons, comes from the operating room, despite the OR being a very small portion of the operating room. 40% of that's potentially recyclable, and we in anesthesia are particularly bad because we produce about a third of all the operating room waste. So we're part of that problem. The second thing that got me interested in this topic is this article published in the CMAJ in 2012 entitled People, Planet and Profits, the Case for Greening the Operating Room. And this is not a journal that I normally read. In fact, I never read this journal, but this particular article caught my eye. And it was written by a guy called Yoan Kagoma, who was a medical student at the time that he wrote this. And he says that some interesting things here is that hospitals are huge energy hogs. Like if you look at the hospital energy bill, it's astronomically high. Also, health care facilities are the second biggest contributors to the landfill, second only to the food industry. And in 2009, the World Health Organization made this statement. They said that the hospitals have the responsibility in making healthcare sustainable, implying the current trend of energy consumption and waste production is not sustainable. We have to do something about this. But sadly, since 2009, it's gotten worse, progressively worse. Now, this being Canada, and there's not a lot of stuff to report in the news, the Free Press jumped onto this article, and this is from the Winnipeg Free Press, the Vancouver Sun. They say one operation, every single operation we do produces as much waste as a family of 4 does in a week. And they go on to discuss, there's 4 cardinal operating room sins. There's 4 big sins. This is from the Huffington Post, the top one, and I think, if I remember correctly, this is from the Globe and Mail. But there's 4 cardinal operating room sins. The first one is the fact that we use disposable gowns, covers, and drapes as opposed to reusable gowns. And they say 85% of all hospitals in North America use disposable gowns and covers. They've been documented to be far worse for the environment. It produces far more waste, more resource energy, more water. They're equally effective, and they cost the same. So that's the bottom line, is they cost the same, and it's much more convenient to use disposable stuff. So that's probably not going to change anytime soon. The second cardinal operating room sin is the fact that we don't recycle. In 2012, only 11% of hospitals in the developed world had any form of recycling. And like we at BC Children's are supposed to be a very green hospital, and we had a fantastic recycling program, but we lost it because we lost our soft plastics recycling because it was often contaminated. And secondly, there's just no global demand for plastics. There's more than enough plastics being manufactured across the world, and China just doesn't want our plastics. So that's a drop in the bucket, the paper recycling that we do. The third cardinal operating room sin is the whole issue of anesthesia agents, which I'll discuss in detail later. And then the fourth cardinal operating room sin is the whole issue of surgical packs or overage. And what that is, quite often you open a pack of something, these disposable packs, the surgeons may use 1 or 2 instruments from that. But now, because the whole thing is now deemed unsterile, the rest goes straight into the garbage. And this results in millions of dollars of waste every single year. So these are the 4 cardinal operating room sins. So what I thought I would do today is I would take 4 different areas in anesthesia where I think we could potentially save a bit of money and also save a lot of waste. Now, the first thing that I'm going to try and talk about is anesthesia circuits. Now, a lot of hospitals throw their circuits out after every single case. Some hospitals simply change the filter at the end of the circuit. Now, I was told by my friend Ed that you guys keep your circuit for the whole day and just change the filter at the end. That's the right thing to do. There's lots of studies there, and I'll discuss this more in detail in Red Deer tomorrow. But just the bottom line is, this is a study published in 1999 from New Jersey. High-quality filtration allows reuse of anesthesia breathing circuits, resulting in cost savings and reduced medical waste. So what they did in this particular study, they took 52 circuits and put a new circuit on every day, and then did multiple cases and simply changed the filter in the front after every case. And before every case, they did bacterial samples from the Y connector and from the inspiratory and expiratory limb. And at the end of the case, they'd repeat those samples, but also take samples from the elbow and from the endotracheal tube. And when they cultured these things, every single endotracheal tube and every single elbow was colonized with bacteria, but not a single Y connector or inspiratory or expiratory limb, which shows that these filters are extremely efficient. In fact, they've been shown to be 99.9998% viral and bacterially efficient at 96 to 100% humidity at 33 to 36 degrees Celsius for 24 hours. So these filters are extremely, extremely efficient, and it's completely acceptable to simply change the filter between patients. The CAS does not have any guidelines. The CAS practice guidelines were updated last year in the CJA. There are specifically no guidelines regarding this. So let's look at what the UK guidelines say. The UK guidelines say the Anesthesia Association of Great Britain and Ireland recommends that anesthetic circuits are routinely changed on a daily basis. If visibly contaminated or used for highly infectious cases, example TB, the circuit should be changed between patients and safely discarded. No attempt should be made to reprocess these items. So completely acceptable to use this circuit for the whole day. And the Australian and New Zealand guidelines are exactly the same. In fact, in Germany, they allow these circuits to be used for 24 hours, and there's a lot of research going on to see if they can extend it to 48, even 72 hours. And there's a paper that they actually used it for a whole week, and there was no increased contamination. So it's completely acceptable to use these circuits for the whole day and simply change your filters. And that's all about it. That's about all I have to say about this particular topic. I'll move on to the next one. So that's the circuits. The next topic where I think, next area where I think we can significantly reduce the amount of waste and redundancy is drug waste. This is a study published out of New Jersey in 2000. Drug use inefficiency, a hidden source of wasted healthcare dollars. So this hospital does about 25,000 cases per year. And what they did is they have electronic records, so they knew exactly how much was administered to the patients. And they knew from the pharmacy how much was dispensed. So they could calculate what they call this annual efficiency index. So this is, you can see that for the 6 most commonly used drugs, 29% of atracurium was actually administered to the patient, 53% of midazolam, 49% of propofol, etc. Succinylcholine was only 33%, and sodium thiopental, that's now obsolete, was only 31%. So obviously the induction agents were by far the most wasted drugs. But they calculated that about a quarter of the operating budget, the drug budget, went straight into the garbage. And this in this particular study was about $14 per patient. So if you do 25,000 cases times $14, it's about $350,000 for this particular hospital. This is a similar study. Drug wastage contributes significantly to the cost of routine anesthesia care, where it was a university hospital. The anesthesia providers were unaware of the study. So over a period of 2 weeks, they went through the waste and looked at what was being wasted. They did 166 cases over 2 weeks, and they wasted $1,800, which amounted to about $11 per case. And if you look at the literature, it's anything between about $8 and $14 is being wasted for every single case we do. In this particular study, they made a very strong case. They said that one of the most commonly wasted drugs was always induction agents, but vasoactive drugs such as ephedrine, phenylephrine, and atropine. And they make a strong case for not routinely drawing these drugs up. They say label the syringe, have it there. If you need it, you can draw it up within 5-10 seconds. That's what we do. That's our business. We're really, really good at that. And so don't draw these drugs up routinely. So this is a similar study earlier this year from Portland, Oregon, and it's preventable drug waste among anesthesia providers, opportunities for efficiency. And they differentiate between what they call preventable waste and routine drug waste. So routine drug waste is, if say you open an ampule of rocuronium and you use 40 milligrams. The 10 milligrams, that's routine drug waste. Preventable waste is drugs that are simply drawn up and not administered at all. And they looked at 10 different drugs, the muscle relaxants, the vasopressors, and the antiemetics. They excluded the induction agents, the propofol is excluded here. And they found the most commonly wasted drugs, once again, was ephedrine, succinylcholine, and lidocaine. I can't quite figure out why they'd waste lidocaine and why they draw it up routinely, so I never do that. But anyway, but ephedrine was unused 50% of the time. So 50% of the time it's drawn up, it's just left and it's not used. And this ephedrine alone in this hospital in Portland amounted to $55,000 for the year for only ephedrine. So they also make a very strong case for not drawing up ephedrine routinely and atropine routinely, and also to lobbying your pharmacy to dilute phenylephrine into 1 milligram syringes diluted to 100 mics per cc. So they make a strong case for trying to convince your pharmacy to do that. The problem with drug waste is twofold. Is firstly, it's the financial aspect, and secondly, there's an environmental impact of all these drugs that we waste. This is a study, propofol wastage in anesthesia, ANA in 2012, where also over a period of, this guy was retired, so he had a lot of time, so a period of 2 weeks, he went through all the waste and looked at what was being wasted, and found that you can see that 32% of all the propofol was being wasted. Sorry, I should use the mouse here. 32% of the propofol was being wasted, 41% of succinylcholine, once you can see ephedrine, once again, 48% of ephedrine was being wasted, and so forth. The problem is that propofol, or wasted or discarded propofol, accounted for 45% of all the wasted drugs. And the problem with propofol specifically is that it doesn't degrade in nature, and so it lands in the landfill. It's very, very mobile in soil. It eventually ends up in the water, and it's apparently very toxic to fish, according to this particular article. And to properly dispose it, you need to incinerate it. So this kind of thing's unacceptable. You can't do this. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that. And so what we have at Children's Hospital in Vancouver, we have these propofol buckets where everyone at the end of their cases or the end of the day just empties their leftover propofol into this bucket, and then every few days.
Sell it.
Sorry?
Then you sell it.
Yeah, you sell it. We can either sell it, or most commonly the environmental services comes in and takes it away and it gets incinerated. But you have to take into account that we do 80% of all our cases are done with total intravenous anesthesia. There's a couple of things that you can do. So the 3 most commonly wasted drugs are propofol, ephedrine, and succinylcholine. So at the Children's Hospital, whenever you do a baby, you have to have succinylcholine drawn up. So what we did at BC Children's, we found that every morning we'd draw it up, and at the end of the day, we'd waste it. And the next day we'd draw it up again. So what we do now is we draw up these packets, these sterile packets of succinylcholine and atropine. So we draw it up once a week, seal them, keep them in the fridge, and then every morning you just remove it, and at the end of the day you return it, you never use it, and at the end of the day, end of the week, if it's unused, then we discard it. So that significantly reduced the amount of succinylcholine that we've wasted. At VGH they do this, they split a phenylephrine ampule into 10, so 1 milligram each, 100 mics per cc. And I suspect you guys are probably doing that as well with phenylephrine. No?
Most of us keep bags.
The pharmacy doesn't do this for you?
Yeah.
They
Your farm.
used to.
They
They
used
used
to.
to, but they stopped. I don't know why.
Yeah, so this
No,
is...
there
Yeah,
was
I don't-
shortage that time.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
short.
That was
Okay,
shortage.
so maybe try and lobby the pharmacy to try and start doing this.
It's
The third-
all about cost for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my budget versus your budget.
Yeah. The third thing you can do is just be absolutely impeccable at what you draw up. Don't draw up drugs that you're not going to use. There's a guy at VGH. Is anyone training UBC here? Oh yeah, Ricky, did you know Mitch Giffen, a guy called Mitch Giffen?
Yeah.
The guy's absolutely impeccable. He's such a role model to me, and when I grow up, I want to be like Mitch. You know, he wastes absolutely nothing. He plans his anesthetics so well that he wastes nothing. And Mitch is the guy that taught me the best way to get rid of your propofol is a process called biological scrubbing, is give it to the patient. And so if you've induced the patient with propofol, if there's a lot of propofol left in the syringe, put it in the pump and run TiVo for the first 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, open your vaporizer, because that way you've used all your propofol, there's no waste, and you've saved the system a bit of volatile anesthetic agent. Also for very short cases, just use TiVo in the short cases. You can get away with, if you mix propofol and remifentanil in a syringe, you can get away with a very, very low amount of propofol. So that's the best way of getting rid of the propofol, is biological scrubbing. And so I wanted to show you this slide. I came on call one day at the Children's Hospital, and it was 4 o'clock, and 3 of my colleagues each gave me their leftover dexmedetomidine. And this was a time when dexmedetomidine was $100 per ampule. So that's 3 of them, that's $300 of dexmedetomidine. Cumulatively, they use about $50 worth of dexmedetomidine. So you think they could have spoken to each other, but there was a lot of waste of dexmedetomidine. And while I'm in the process of complaining about my colleagues, so hopefully this stays in the room here, but I've got a colleague, I said we do 80% of TiVo, so I've got a colleague that routinely insists on using 2 extensions for every single TiVo that he does. So he's got propofol, there's 1 extension, then the second extension, and he leaves the first one coiled. So 2 extension every single patient that he does. He never uncoils it. And so he does 1,000 cases a year. That's 2 additional extensions on every single patient. These things cost $1.50 each, so that's $3,000 a year that he wastes only on extensions. And it drives me absolutely crazy. I cannot understand why he does this, and I've questioned him about it, and he says, yeah, but he's just in case one of them fractures or breaks. And anyway, so thank you. It feels like a therapy session to me this morning. I get bench and pain, and everybody's listening, so thanks a lot for listening to me. So that is drug waste. I think that's an area that we can potentially reduce our waste. The next one is disposable airway equipment, or more specifically LMAs. This is a study published in ANA in 2012, Comparative Life Cycle Assessment of Disposable and Reusable LMAs, by a guy called Matthew Eckelman, who's an environmental engineer in Boston. So what he did is use a single-use disposable unique LMA and compared that to 40 uses of a classical LMA. So firstly, in terms of cost, the reusable LMA costs $200 to buy, and if you divide that by 40 uses, that's $5 every time you use it, plus $3 for cleaning and sterilizing, that's $8 for, and the disposable one costs $9.60, so that's half a cup of coffee, so it's no big difference. But if you do the environmental life cycle assessment, it strongly favors the reusable LMA. The reusable LMA, the main issue is the washing and sterilizing the thing, but the disposable LMA comes with all this waste, all this packaging that it comes in, and every time you open it, there's more layers of plastic. And then the polymer PVC plastic that it's made of is really, really bad for the environment, not only to manufacture, but also to dispose of. Another thing you need to keep into account, it's not just, these things are manufactured in Singapore, so if you use a reusable LMA, it's 1 shipment that comes to Vancouver, or to Edmonton. But if you use reusable ones, then if you use disposable ones, it's 40 different shipments. So that in itself is a significant carbon footprint. This is a diagram from this particular article. They use this method called the BEES method. It's the Building for Economic and Environmental Sustainability to do these life cycle assessments. And so it's a well-validated method. You can see the dark blue is disposable, the light blue is reusable. Every single aspect of the environmental assessment, the disposable was significantly worse than the reusable. This is the effect on global warming, acidification, human health, cancer risk, human health, non-cancer risk, air pollutants, eutrophication, ecotoxicity, smog, water intake, everything, ozone depletion, every single aspect of that life cycle assessment, the disposable LMAs were significantly worse. And it's mainly this PVC plastic is really, really bad for the environment. So this is a very good review article. I guess all of you read pediatric anesthesia all the time. Very good review article in pediatric anesthesia in 2014 on new supraglottic airway devices, tracheal tubes and airway viewing devices, cost effective. And it goes into the history as to why we've moved from reusable to disposable instruments. And the main issue was the concern for transmission of infections, mainly prions and CJD. And this led to obviously a surge in single-use disposable. Also the patent for the LMA ran out, so that was another reason why the disposable LMAs became more popular. But to make a long story short, it's very well summarized in this article. There's not a single proven case of CJD, transmission via airway equipment. And there's absolutely no evidence that reusable airway equipment poses any risk at all, providing it's cleaned, it's sterilized properly. And if you add that to the fact that 85,000 tons of PVC medical equipment are manufactured every single year in Europe, this is almost a plea to please start using reusable LMAs again and lobby your equipment lead, I'm not sure who that is, encourage him to start to buy reusable LMAs rather than disposable LMAs. This is a very interesting, at the bottom here, an editorial on the BJA in 2006 by a guy called Tim Cook, who writes a lot in the BJA. The classical LMA, tried and tested airway, what now? And the interesting thing there is that PVC plastic is innately very hard. To make it soft, they have to mix it with something called phthalates. The European Parliament has banned the use of phthalates in children's toys because these things are potentially carcinogenic and kids put these toys in their mouths. Yet a lot of these disposable LMAs contain phthalates, and so you put them in the patient's mouth and these things leak out. So that's never mentioned in any article, so that's just something to keep in mind. But if you use reusable LMAs, I think they work better and they're far, far better for the environment. So the final thing that I'm going to discuss this morning is the whole issue of the volatile anesthetic agents. And I honestly believe that nothing that we do is as bad for the environment as the volatile agents that we use. So this is an article published by a guy called Mats Anderson, assessing the impact of global climate from general anesthetic gases. This is from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. So these guys are rocket scientists. They're very, very smart people. Look at all those PhDs. And I've read this article a couple of times and I still struggle to wrap my head around it. It's very complex. But they talk about the whole issue of radiative forcing. And what that is just the balance of incoming and outgoing energy. So you get electromagnetic radiation coming in, mainly infrared radiation, bounces off at least through the atmospheric window, and often this energy gets trapped in this atmospheric window by all these greenhouse gases. So if more energy comes in than leaves, that's called positive radiative forcing. That's generally bad. But the halogenated organic compounds, and remember all the volatile agents are halogenated organic compounds. And I'm trying to think what the halogens are. It's chloride, bromide, fluoride, iodide, and there's one that I can't remember, and then there's another one that's unnamed. Maybe the residents would know if there's any reason. But nevertheless, all the volatile agents are halogenated organic compounds, and they occur in the atmosphere in a concentration 1,000,000 times less than carbon dioxide. But they're responsible for between 10 and 15% of all radiative forcing. So the bottom line of this is that these volatile anesthetic agents are extremely potent greenhouse gases. And the article goes on to introduce the concept of the global warming potential. So what that is everything is relative to carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the most common, most prevalent greenhouse gas. So if they say desflurane has a global warming potential of 2,540, what that means is a specific mass of desflurane, say 1 kilogram of desflurane, can trap 2,540 times as much heat as a similar mass of carbon dioxide. Same with ISO and SIVO and all the other agents. So it's a little more complex than that, in that these agents all have varying atmospheric lifetimes. So you can see over here that nitrous oxide lasts 114 years in the atmosphere. Halothane 1 year, enflurane 4.3 years, so that the global warming potential is expressed on either a 20, 100, or a 500-year time horizon. More than that, nitrous oxide and isoflurane are the agents that we use today also have ozone depletion potential. So this is just a simpler version of the same table. You can see here that the atmospheric lifetime for sevoflurane is 1.2 years, isoflurane is 3.6, and DES is 10 years. Because 20 is twice as long as the longest lasting volatile agent, which is DES for 10 years. They use the global warming potential 20 to express these things. And basically what this means, if you can say that sevoflurane has a global warming potential 20 of 349, that means over the next 20 years a specific mass of sevoflurane, say 1 kilogram, will trap 20 times as much heat as a similar mass of carbon dioxide. And incidentally, the only way these things can get broken down in the atmosphere, they have to react with hydroxyl radicals. That's how they get broken down. So how does this relate to how we use these agents clinically? Like every morning you wake up and you decide between your Wheaties and your Shreddies and your bacon and eggs, and then you come to work and you have to decide what am I going to use, Sevo or DES or isoflurane, which one's the best for the environment. And it's a little more complex because these agents all have different MACs and they have different solubilities, they have different molecular weights, and their density is all different. So to answer that question, we have to just look at a bit of high school physics. This was Avogadro, he's an Italian scientist. And remember Avogadro said 1 mole of an ideal gas at standard temperature and pressure occupies 22.4 liters. We know that. At room temperature, it'll occupy 24 liters. So if we know that, and we know what the molecular weight is, we know what the density is, we can calculate exactly how many grams of the agent we're using at specific fresh gas flows. And it's a lot of fun to do. So next time you're doing a long case with a resident or with a staff guy, give them the molecular weight and the density and say, 1 liter of this agent at this setting, how much are we using per hour? And it's actually a nice calculation. See if you can come up with it. Or you can just cheat and look at this table that Susan Ryan has done for us. So what she did here, Susan Ryan works out of Stanford in San Francisco. So what she did, she took 1 MAC of Sevo, 1 MAC of ISO, and 1 MAC of DES. For Sevo, she ran a fresh gas flow of 2 liters a minute. For ISO and DES, she ran 0.5, 1, and 2 liters per minute, respectively. Then she calculated how many grams per hour of these agents were being used. So a very easy calculation. We know what the global warming potential of 20 of these agents are. So if you multiply the grams per hour by the global warming potential, you get what we call the carbon dioxide equivalent. So this is the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide that you're emitting into the atmosphere. So you can see an hour of Sevo at 2 liters a minute would be 6,980 grams of carbon dioxide and so forth. Now these figures are very difficult to remember. The only figure that you need to remember is this last column. It's called the ratioed carbon dioxide equivalent. Because sevoflurane has the lowest global warming potential, she gave it a ratio of 1. So you can see that the only thing that's better than 2 liters per minute of Sevo is a half a liter per minute of ISO, which is 0.6. But as soon as your ISO fresh gas flows goes to 1 liter a minute, it becomes 1.1. And at 2 liters, it's 2.2. Desflurane is by far the worst for the environment. Half a liter per minute of desflurane is 6.7 times as bad as 2 liters per minute of Sevo. And at equivalent fresh gas flows, DES is 26.8. So if you run the same fresh gas flow for these 3 agents, this is the ratioed carbon dioxide equivalent at the same fresh gas flows for 1 MAC. So Sevo would be 1, ISO would be 2.2, and desflurane is 26.8, so significantly worse. Now, whenever I give this talk, people say, so what? It doesn't care, it doesn't matter. It's a minuscule amount compared to all the other greenhouse gases. And that's true to a certain extent. I mean, the main culprit is still carbon dioxide. And the concentration of carbon dioxide is slowly increasing. It's now, for the first time ever, more than 400 parts per million. It used to be 275 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution. Methane is the second most prevalent greenhouse gas. Methane, as you know, comes from natural gas and from agriculture and from cows, etc. Nitrous oxide, the third most prevalent greenhouse gas. The problem with nitrous oxide, it lasts 115 years in the atmosphere. And as you know, nitrous oxide comes from agriculture and from fertilizer and stuff like that. And then the halogenated organic compounds is the fourth most prevalent greenhouse gas. And this whole argument's been raised in the literature before. This is a letter to the editor by a guy called Edmund Eger, who works out in San Francisco. And he said a different perspective on anesthetic and climate change. He says, overall contribution of volatile anesthetics to the greenhouse gas emission is less than 0.01. So why do we care? This is not true because, firstly, we don't know how many anesthetics are being delivered worldwide. We have no idea. Secondly, we also don't know what the ratio of desflurane to isoflurane to sevoflurane is. Because if the whole world used desflurane, this figure would be significantly higher. If the whole world used iso or sevo, it would be much lower. And this particular calculation was based on one hospital in the US, in Detroit, that uses only iso and sevoflurane. So the reality is this figure is likely much, much, much higher. So I honestly feel that it does matter, because I think that, I always say that we have no control about what anybody else does. You can control what you do. You can control your own environmental impact. And I think we have a social obligation to patients to be good stewards of the limited amount of environmental resources that we have. And every year they say that the previous year was the warmest year ever recorded. So this is from January 2015, they said 2014 was the warmest year ever recorded. And then in 2016, they said, well, 2015 was the warmest year ever recorded, and 2016 is on target to be the warmest year ever recorded. This is an article from the Lancet published in 2009, the Managing the Health Effects of Climate Change. And it says climate change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. And what really bothers me about this is that, coming from Africa, is that climate change effects on health will exacerbate the inequities between rich and poor. Climate change will have its greatest effect on those who have the least access to the world's resources and who have contributed least to its cause. And we're the ones driving it. And the third world are the people that are going to suffer the most. This is a fantastic letter written to the editor, and I hope nobody still uses nitrous oxide. This is a guy called Forbes McGain, who works out in Melbourne, in Australia. So he said, why anesthetists should no longer use nitrous oxide. And he draws an analogy between using nitrous oxide and car driving. Ed, have you seen this before? So he says, say you use a half a liter of nitrous oxide for the day in the operating room for 7 hours. I adjusted this slightly from his initial letter, but say for 7 hours, that means you're using 210 liters for the day. If you then, we know that is 8.75 moles, because 24 liters is 1 mole. So that's 8.75 moles. We know what the molecular weight of nitrous oxide is. So that implies that's 385 grams that we're using for the day, or 0.385 kilograms. If we multiply that by the global warming potential of nitrous oxide, we get the carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's 115 kilograms of carbon dioxide that we're emitting into the atmosphere. We know that if we burn 1 liter of petrol, we get 2.8 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So we can burn 41 liters of petrol to get the equivalent of 115 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And the average car gets about 12 kilometers to the liter. So that implies we can drive 500 kilometers for a similar amount of carbon dioxide. So a day of nitrous oxide at half a liter a minute for 7 hours is the equivalent of driving 500 kilometers on your car. So what about, this inspired me to do my own little calculation. This is entirely my own table. What about the volatile anesthetic agents? So I said, if you do 1 Mac at 1 liter a minute for 1 hour, so it's 1 Mac of SIVO, ISO, and DES. So this is how many grams per hour you'd be using in the second column there. If I multiply that by the global warming potential 100, and I use the global warming potential 100, which is a very conservative estimate, this is how many grams of carbon dioxide equivalent that I would be getting. So an hour of SIVO is 1.3 kilograms of carbon dioxide. An hour of ISO, 2.8 kilograms. And an hour of DES is 64 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And then this is my own little acronym, of which I'm very proud and thinking of patenting. It's the liter of petrol equivalent. It's just a... Anyway. This is how many liters of petrol do you actually need to burn to get the similar amount of CO2. So an hour of SIVO is half a liter of petrol, an hour of ISO is 1 liter of petrol, and an hour of DES is 23 liters of petrol. So how does this relate to car driving? So say you do 1 case for the day, just 1 case. You come in, you set your fresh gas flow at 1 liter a minute, and you run 1 Mac for that whole day. That's all you do. If you're using SIVO, that's the equivalent of 40 kilometers of car driving. If you're using ISO, it's 84 kilometers of car driving, and if you're using DES, it's almost 2,000 kilometers of car driving. Remember, this is not how we use these agents clinically. If you do multiple cases, most of the anesthetic agents actually used in the first 15 minutes. If you do a room with many different cases, you can easily multiply this by 3 or even 4. That's all the significance of it. There's people that feel very, very strongly that we should not be using DES. This is a letter to the editor by somebody from Cairns in Australia, in the Australian Journal. Desflurane is a potent anesthetic atmospheric pollutant and should be removed from our clinical practice. I personally have stopped using Desflurane. I don't use it at all. I don't think I think there's other alternatives that are as good. But I think that there probably is still a role for DES. If you have somebody who's morbidly obese or somebody with a really difficult airway, you want to wake them up very rapidly in the end, there's a role for DES. But I feel strongly that DES should not be your default anesthetic. You should always use isoflurane or sevoflurane. And if there's a specific indication, maybe in 15% of the times, go ahead and use DES, but do not use it as your default. It's too bad for the environment, and there are other alternatives that are as good. There's 2 issues that always arises here. And the first is people say, well, their patients wake up so much faster with Desflurane. This is an editorial in CJA last year, fast wake-up time in obese patients, which anesthetic is best. And I'll just read the final paragraph from this editorial. It says, By appropriately adapting other aspects of the conduct of the anesthesia, the anesthesiologist can tailor the anesthetic to the needs of the obese patient with any of the 3 common volatile agents, so the patient may still be able to wake up equally rapidly in the operating room. I believe you just need to learn how to use these drugs properly. There's an example of a hospital in the University of Utah. So they were using a lot of desflurane. So in order to try and cut costs, they decided to reduce their desflurane consumption by 50%. So the next year, they saved $300,000 is what they saved for the year, and their carbon footprint was reduced by the equivalent of 5.4 million miles of driving, and their patient turnover time in the operating room didn't change. So that's the significance
They
of that.
don't use desert oil anymore.
In Utah.
No.
So Vancouver General Hospital has completely switched from DES to SIVO. They use very, very little DES still. The other issue is the whole issue of compound A. I'm not going to make a long story of this. The short of this is compound A is a non-issue. Forget about it. There's more than 800 million anesthetics delivered worldwide. Not a single case with sevoflurane, not a single case report of compound A-induced nephrotoxicity. Second thing is you have to have either sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide to make compound A. None of the CO2 absorbers anymore have sodium or potassium hydroxide. And you might want to check what you have. I know we use something called low-flow Zorb, which is calcium hydroxide. I'm not sure what you guys use here, but I can almost guarantee you that there will not be sodium or potassium hydroxide in your CO2 absorber. So compound A is a non-issue. It's forget about it. It's not an issue. My friend Cedric Ho, do you know Cedric, Rick? Cedric Ho, was he a...
No, I don't. No.
Anyway, Cedric Ho is one of the anesthesiologists in Vancouver, and he said to me, well, this is nothing compared to all the methane that a cow produces. So I said, well, okay. I went to said, Siri, how much methane does a cow produce? So Siri came up with this website. So 110 kilograms of methane is produced annually by 1 dairy cow, 2 beef cows, 14 sheep, a bunch of goats, and even more pigs. But one dairy cow produces 450 liters of methane every single day. So if you do the calculation, I'm not going to bore you with the whole calculation, but it's the equivalent of 44 kilometers of car driving. That's for a dairy cow, and for a beef cow, it's 24 kilometers of car driving. So it shows that we should change our diets. We should be eating peas and lentils and beans and stuff. In which case, we'll be the ones producing the methane. But that's a different story.
Vegetables will go up.
I found this picture on the internet. So they strap these backpacks on the cows, and then they can calculate how much methane they produce. So just don't smoke your cigarette next to this cow. You might end up in the burn unit or something. Anyway, just in terms of cost, how much do these agents cost per hour? And these are prices that we pay for at BC Children's Hospital. So whatever you guys might have different pricing, but an hour of desflurane at 1 Mac, 1 liter a minute, is $8.54. Sevoflurane is $5.75. Isoflurane is very, very cheap. It's only 60 cents. So I shouldn't say this too loud, but isoflurane is my number one anesthetic, volatile anesthetic agent. You guys didn't hear that. And propofol, because we use 80% of all our cases are done with propofol for a 20 kilogram child. It's about $4.20 for an hour. If you read one article from this whole talk that I've given you today, I want you to read this article. I give this to the residents all the time. It's the Managing the Fresh Gas Flow to Reduce the Environmental Contamination written by a guy called Jeffrey Feltman, who's an anesthesiologist at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. I just love this article. It's so well written. And I remember when I was a resident in Cape Town, I was in my first couple of months there, and one of the staff guys came in and he gave me this equation called the Lowe equation. It's an equation which governs the uptake of volatile anesthetic agent. And he just taught me a little piece of paper, and I somehow remembered it, and I've been teaching it to the residents. I could never find the reference. And then I found it in the reference in this paper, and I liked the paper even more. And I even emailed this guy, and he emailed me back, and it went up another notch. I liked it still more. But if you really, this is a fantastic article, a fantastic paper to read. I would strongly recommend you reading this thing. If you remember one slide from today, I want you to remember this slide. During maintenance of anesthesia, you obviously want your fresh gas flow as low as possibly can. And I always say to the residents, try and aim for 300 moles per minute of fresh gas flow, because we have these new ACES machines, and as soon as your fresh gas flow goes to below 300, it goes to 100% oxygen. So 300, you can still adjust your FR to at 300 moles per minute. So that's what I aim for. One of the disadvantages of using low fresh gas flows is that you use a lot of CO2 absorber. So when you run TIVA, as we do in 80% of cases, you want to convert your circle system to an open system. Open system means when your fresh gas flow is higher than your minute ventilation, that's by definition an open system, and you're not going to use any CO2 absorber. So when you run TIVA, increase your fresh gas flows. You won't use any CO2 absorber. Save the CO2 absorber. And when you run volatile anesthetic agent, low fresh gas flows, at least at the maximum 300 moles per minute. The final article I want to discuss here, still got a bit of time, is my favorite part of A&A to read. It's called The Open Mind. They always have a strange slant on things. This is written by a guy called Forbes McGain, Workplace Sustainability, the Cradle to Grave View of What We Do. And they have this table of how we can improve the environmental sustainability of our anesthetic practice. And obviously lead by example. I think that's very, very important. We train a lot of residents and medical students, so leading by example is important. Anesthesia agents, low flow anesthesia, that's logical. Consider TIVA wherever possible. TIVA is still better for the environment. It's got no greenhouse gas emission. Less nitrous oxide and desflurane. I would say no nitrous oxide and very little desflurane. And then turn off medical devices and monitors when not in use. They say the operating room is only used 40% of the time. So whenever you're not in the room, make sure that everything's turned off, all the machines and monitors on standby. That'll significantly reduce the hospital energy bill. A couple of other things. Consider reusable items such as LMAs, which we've just discussed. Do you, for the same patient, consider the minimum number of syringes needed? And then, do you actively need to warm all your patients and minimize driving to work? I know that. Does Rob Steele's not here? Does he still bike to work, Rob? Still bikes to work. So, should all be
John Coda does now.
John does too.
John does too?
Yeah.
Oh, that's impressive. So, these are a bunch of things that we can do to improve the environmental sustainability of your practice. This, I don't know, somebody sent me this picture, and I cannot for the life of me remember who it was. If that person's here, could you put up your hand? I'm having a go at Ed here. Ed sent me this picture. It's a picture of 1,000 syringes. So if you use one less syringe, just one syringe less on every single case you do, this is what you'll save in a year. My biggest pet peeve is the anesthetic suction. This is an emergency suction. If you as much as put the tip of this suction into the patient's mouth, whether you get any saliva or not, that's 10 feet of PVC plastic and 2-liter PVC liner. It goes straight into the garbage. Remember, not all patients need suctioning. LMAs were designed to come out without needing to suction. And the answer is there's a surgical suction right there. You just ask the circulating nurse to hand you the surgical suction. You put on a fresh tip and you use the surgical suction, and that will save the environment of all that plastic. That's a huge waste for a very, very little yield. So that's my rave for the day. I said in the beginning that one operation produces as much waste as a family of 4 does in a week. And I think we've unfortunately regressed beyond that. I think one anesthetic produces as much waste as a family of 4 does in a week. You can see he has the bear hugger that's very often unnecessary. He has this circuit. You don't have to throw it out after every single case. Definitely not. The anesthetic suction, the oxygen tubing, the LMA, all these IV bags that the patients come in, which we always throw away when they come to OR. All the drug waste. I think one anesthetic produces as much waste as a family of 4 does in a week. I'm going to leave you with 2 quotes here. The first one is the editorial in the CMAJ in 2013, Physicians' Role on the Front Line of Climate Change. It says the time of warnings and cautions is over. We are headed on a disastrous trajectory that only immediate, wise action can mitigate. If we do not act now, our descendants will bear the consequences and we will bear the blame. We have to act right now. And the final quote is from Susan Ryan, who wrote the editorial in May 2012 issue of A&A. And she says, anesthesiologists put patients first. That's what responsible doctors do. However, the patient is more than the human being under our immediate care. The patient includes the family, the neighbors, the community, the country, and the world. Our patient is all of humanity. Accepting responsibility for environmental stewardship puts patients first. So I thought that was a very, very good quote. And that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.